The Law of Ice, a magic book with a good combination of damage and support spells. We're going to go through them and talk about how to make the best use of them. Simple. Let's get on with it. First up, we have Ice Sheet. This is a speed reduction to an area of 55 meters, which is pretty huge, reduces by 25%, also reduces charge speed 25%, which is less useful. That'll just take away a little bit of impact damage, but not really that much. It's also a pretty cheap spell at only 4 winds of magic, which can make it nicely cost effective. It's going to be the most use at the start of a battle. Basically, this spell wants to be used to slow the enemy down to give your missiles more time to fire. So you can snap it to a unit, but this isn't a great idea because the unit's going to be halfway through the circle if you do that. So you want to pop the circle in front of the units that you wish to slow down. This will make them run the full length of the circle, thus maximizing the time that you slow them down. But do remember that you only want to do this when the enemies are in range of your ranged units, otherwise the slowdown is completely pointless. So make sure they're in range first and then drop the Ice Sheet to make the most of the entire 17 seconds of that spell. And this is just going to buy your missile units an extra 2 or 3 volleys to get off on the enemy before they arrive in melee, depending on the speed of your enemies of course. Especially useful here against Slaanesh factions with their lack of armor and weakness to missiles. And as you can see here, we're slowing these demonettes down to pretty much the same pace as the marauders next to them, so that's bringing 54 speed down to about 38, which is pretty good and will buy us that extra time to get a few more missiles off and damage these Slaaneshi bastards. So that's the main way to use this spell, I think. After that, it's going to be a little more difficult to use, but you can still find some good uses for it, slowing down faster things like cavalry and monsters, stopping them from running away, or just again trying to find situations where you can make use of that extra time that missiles will get to fire. And then we have Ice Maiden's Kiss, a tear-shaped breath attack, which only costs 6 winds of magic, which is pretty reasonable, and also adds Frostbite, reducing the enemy speed 30%. There's also an Overcast version which will double the damage at about 60% extra winds of magic cost. Now, while this spell is fairly simple to use, as you can see on the unit card, it has 0% armor piercing damage. It is rubbish against anything with armor, and also rubbish against anything that isn't infantry, so use it on lightly armored infantry primarily. Here I'm going to try and hit 2 units with it so I can give Frostbite to both those units. Even though I don't really damage the first unit, you can see there I've slowed them by 30%, again giving my missiles more time to wear them down. So we can use it in a similar fashion to Ice Sheet to slow things down to buy missile time, but remember, lightly armored infantry only. Primarily, less than 20 armor is probably best, but maybe 30 at most. Anything more than that, it's probably going to be a waste. And it's also good to use it when units are engaged in melee and easy targets to hit. As they'll be a bit more bunched up, you should be able to do more damage, especially if there's a bunch of clumped up units. The only downside here being that you don't get any use out of Frostbite. But that's no biggie. It's probably worth overcasting as well on more expensive enemy units. Next, we move on to Frost Blades, 7 winds of magic for a nice damage boost, 25% armor piercing and base damage, 24 melee attack, and it imbues magical attacks for a tasty 26 seconds. The Overcast version simply doubles the damage boost on base and armor piercing damage, so just adds more power, which is pretty worthwhile for only 3 extra winds of magic, if you don't mind the miscast chance, of course. So these kind of buffs very often have a couple of uses. You can use it to help a losing unit turn around and become a winning unit with that extra damage, or you can give a winning unit the buff to make it win faster, thus helping you break through a little bit quicker. And it can be used on any unit really, infantry, monsters, cavalry, they can all benefit from the damage boost. But one of the more important ways to use this for Kislev is against demons. Because they have a 20% physical resistance, the imbuing of magic that this spell gives will simply nullify that physical resistance and allow your Kislev units to do more damage to the demons. Next we have Death Frost, which if you've heard of the spell Spirit Leech, you'll know exactly what this is, as it's basically the same. A direct damage spell that will just rip health off the enemy with nothing they can do about it. Does the same damage as Spirit Leech, but lasts longer at a 20-second duration. However, it is more expensive at 14 winds of magic, which is pretty expensive as spells go. As for the Overcast version, it simply extends the range at which you can cast a spell, so you can cast it from further away. This isn't a great deal of use, especially at the cost of 3 winds of magic. You can probably just move closer in a lot of cases. The only time that's really going to be useful is if you've got a lord right on the edge of death and you want to finish them off, but they're not quite close enough. Maybe then you might want to overcast. But this spell is very simple. As it says on the unit card, strong versus characters, and that is the only place you should be using it, on lords and heroes. Not even other single entities, only lords and heroes. I did try testing it on some other single entities, the Keeper of Secrets and the Soul Grinder, and also a lower model count unit, the Fiends. And what I found was after one use of Death Frost, I looked at Katarin's unit card to see what damage value she had, and against Nakari it was always about 400 damage value, where it was only 200 damage value or less against all of those other units. So use Death Frost against lords and heroes only. And then we have Crystal Sanctuary. A 60% damage resistance, but you will be frozen solid pretty much, as the unit you've cast it on won't be able to move. And it lasts a handy 35 seconds, but is fairly expensive at 14 Winds of Magic. And if you overcast it, you will nearly double the cost in Winds of Magic, but fairly so, as it turns this spell from a single target spell into an area spell, so you'll be able to buff 2 or 3 units with this in a 35 meter range. Now, given the fairly substantial cost in Winds of Magic of this spell, it's not one you want to use lightly. It can be a great emergency spell for situations like this. I saw Nakari heading for my Katarin, so I dropped Crystal Sanctuary on her. Now, she's pretty much not taking any damage from him at all, and I can line up my Streltsy to put some hurt on him. So a really good emergency spell. When you see some terrible situation about to befall one of your units, you can drop Crystal Sanctuary on them and protect them pretty damn well, whether it be from melee, missile, or magic damage. If you want a more simplified use though, it can be good for helping you hold a line that little bit longer, or just helping a unit survive better if it's a cavalry or something. Or if you want to fork out the extra Winds of Magic, you can turn it into that area spell, of course, which might allow you to maybe hit 2 units of your front line, or if there's a big clump of your troops later in the battle and they're all in there fighting with a bunch of other stuff, you can just drop that on the area of them, buff up 2 or 3, maybe 4 units if possible, and really help your army survive that late game when things might be quite tough. This spell, like I say, could be a good emergency saver. And now to the last spell in the lore book, the Heart of Winter. A very expensive spell at 24 Winds of Magic, but it is a direct damage area spell. So kind of like Death Frost, but over an area. And it also has phases. Every 8 seconds up to the 4 phases, it will increase damage as it goes, and also reduce speed in the higher stages as well. The overcast version is pretty disgusting, as it increases the damage fairly significantly, but bumps it up to a whopping 28 Winds of Magic in cost. Now this one is fairly simple to use. You just find a big blob of enemies and drop this on top of them. It's not much good on moving targets, as it is quite a small area, and obviously you want to try and find units that are engaged in combat that can't simply just run out of the circle straight away, because if you put it on a bunch of units that are just stood there chilling out, they're probably just going to run out of the circle and it won't do anything. Primarily you want to drop it on infantry, but if there's other stuff in the circle, that's all good, it's just extra damage to do. And also if you drop it on faster units like monsters or cavalry, they're probably just going to run out the circle pretty easily. But big damage to do on clumps of infantry. Probably want to overcast it if there's some really expensive units in that blob. Otherwise, probably best to just keep it the regular version. But there we go, the Lore of Ice. Hopefully this helps you understand all the spells a little bit better and how they're meant to be used. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the future.